Welcome to the 12-Minute Leadership Podcast, where in 12 minutes or less, I'll share small things that you can put into immediate practice that will make a big difference in your leadership effectiveness. I'm your host, Elise Boggs-Morales, leadership professor, consultant, and coach. For the last 17 years, I have helped thousands of leaders level up their influence and achieve remarkable results. If you want to trade compliance for true commitment and create your dream team, you are in the right place. Get ready for a quick hit of practical wisdom to increase your team's engagement, inspire top performance, and retain your best talent. Ready to level up your influence and get better results? 12 minutes starts now. Hi everyone, Elise here. Welcome back to the podcast. Over the last several weeks, we've been on a journey together exploring what I've called the inner work of leadership. It began with my conversation with my coach, Roseanne Austin, where we talked about how our mindset influences every area of our lives. Then we explored the stories we tell ourselves and how those stories quietly shape our leadership. Last week, we looked at one of the biggest stories many of us inherit, our definition of success, and asked, whose definition of success am I actually living? Today, I want to conclude this series by talking about what I believe sits underneath all of it, identity. Depending on where you're at in your leadership journey, many leaders aren't just leading, they're proving they're capable, proving they belong, proving they deserve the promotion, proving they're smart enough, proving they're worthy of the title they've been given. And when leadership becomes about proving instead of serving, it becomes exhausting. There's a difference between performance and identity. One of the biggest lessons I've learned through coaching leaders is this: the higher people climb, the easier it becomes to confuse what they do with who they are. Without realizing it, our identity becomes attached to our performance. We begin believing things like, if my business is thriving, I'm successful. If my team is performing well, I'm a good leader. If I receive praise, I'm valuable. While those things feel true, they're incredibly fragile foundations to build your identity upon. Because what happens when business slows down, when a project fails, when you make a leadership mistake? If your identity is built on performance, then every setback becomes personal. One of the places I've seen this play out over the last couple years is in coaching executives for succession planning and retirement. This process reveals where a person's identity is rooted. What's fascinating is how differently people experience the exact same transition. For some, retirement is exciting. They're looking forward to spending more quality time with family, traveling, volunteering, mentoring younger leaders, investing in hobbies they've never had time to pursue. They see retirement not as the end of their purpose, but as the beginning of a new chapter. For others, retirement feels terrifying, not because they're leaving a job, but because they're leaving the place where they found much of their identity. Without work, they're left wondering, who am I if I'm no longer the CEO? What value do I have if I'm no longer leading this organization? Where do I find purpose now? The difference isn't financial. It isn't even about how much they love their work. More often than not, it's about where they've rooted their identity. If our identity is built solely on what we do, every career transition becomes an identity crisis. When our identity is rooted in something deeper, we're free to embrace new seasons instead of fearing them. I've also seen something similar play out with promotions. Promotion can become an identity trap too. Many of the leaders I coach are on the verge of significant career opportunities, a new executive role, a promotion, a seat at the leadership table. What's interesting isn't whether they want the promotion, almost everyone does, it's how they hold it. Some leaders pursue it with excitement, but loosely. They continue to do great work, they prepare themselves, they remain patient, and when the opportunity comes, wonderful. If it takes longer than expected, they're disappointed, but ultimately they're okay. Their identity isn't dependent on the outcome. There are others who unknowingly begin building their entire identity around the promotion. Everything becomes, when I finally become vice president, when I finally get that executive title, when I'm finally promoted. The promotion quietly becomes proof that they're successful, proof that they're valuable, proof that they finally arrived. That's a heavy burden to place on a title. Titles were never designed to carry our identity. They're simply roles we steward for a season. Whether it's retirement, a promotion, a business, or a leadership role, the question underneath is always the same. Am I finding my identity in what I do or in who I am? Eventually, every role changes. Every career transitions. Every title is handed to someone else. When that day comes, what remains? That's the question identity answers. So how do you know if you're leading from performance? There are a few signs I've learned to recognize. And by the way, I know the signs not only from coaching others, but also from looking in the mirror at myself. I'm well acquainted with this topic. The first is that you never quite feel like you've done enough. No matter how much you've accomplished, there's always another mountain to climb. Not because you simply enjoy growth, but because achievement has become the way you measure your worth. Another sign is that feedback feels deeply personal. Constructive feedback doesn't simply feel like information, it feels like a verdict. When your identity is tied to performance, criticism feels like criticism of you, not simply your work. And finally, you struggle to rest. Even when your body slows down, your mind doesn't. Somewhere along the way, productivity became connected to your value. So here's the leadership impact and why this matters. This isn't just personal, it affects everyone you lead. Leaders who feel they constantly have to prove themselves often become leaders who struggle to trust others. They micromanage, they hesitate to delegate, they avoid admitting mistakes. They carry responsibilities that belong to other people. Not because they're controlling, not because they don't care, but because they're protecting something, their identity. While they're trying to prove they're a good leader, they're unintentionally limiting the growth of everyone around them. Now imagine the opposite. What changes when your identity is secure? Imagine a leader whose identity isn't dependent on performance. That leader can admit when they don't know something, they can ask for help, they can celebrate someone else's success without feeling threatened. They can delegate because they don't need to be the hero. They can receive feedback without becoming defensive. They can rest without feeling guilty. This isn't because they're less ambitious, it is because their ambition is no longer driven by insecurity. They're leading from purpose, not from proving. As I mentioned earlier, I know this topic well because I've navigated my own journey around it. This has probably been one of the biggest mindset shifts in my own life. Earlier in my career, I unknowingly tied much of my identity to achievement. Building the business, serving more clients, growing, accomplishing, checking the next box. While I still care deeply about excellence and making an impact, I've realized something over the last few years. The healthier I become internally, the less I feel the need to constantly prove myself externally. Ironically, my life today is fuller than it's ever been. I have a growing business, a toddler, another little one on the way, more responsibilities than ever before, and yet I actually feel more peaceful than I did years ago. Not because life became easier, but because my identity became steadier. That doesn't mean that I've arrived. It simply means I'm learning that my worth isn't based solely on my productivity, and that has changed the way that I lead. So here's a question to reflect on. Who are you trying to prove yourself to? Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's a former boss. Maybe it's the industry you're in. Maybe it's yourself. Or maybe you've been proving for so long, you don't even know anymore. What if leadership was never meant to be about proving? What if it was meant to be about serving, growing, developing others, making an impact? What if your value was never something you had to earn, but something you simply needed to remember? As we close this series, I hope one thing has become clear. Your mindset matters. The stories you believe matter. Your definition of success matters. All of these things shape your leadership. Underneath all of them is your identity. When your identity is rooted in who you are, not what you accomplish, you no longer have to spend your life proving yourself. You're finally free to spend it developing others. I found that the strongest leaders I've had the privilege of coaching aren't the ones constantly trying to prove who they are. They're the ones who already know. They're free to ask questions, free to admit mistakes, to celebrate others, to develop others, free to rest, free to lead with confidence instead of comparison. Secure leaders don't spend their lives trying to prove their worth. They spend their lives helping others discover theirs. So, I hope you enjoyed this series. Share it with another leader who needs it. I'll see you next time. Like what you heard on today's episode and want to go deeper? Subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also pick up my book, Lead Anyone, on Amazon. Then, go to my website to check out ways that we can support your leadership goals. From executive retreats to customized training and coaching, my team of experts will help you level up your leadership and accelerate your results. Go to www.eliseboggs.com for more info.